Welcome to another episode Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Jessica.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jessica. Now, Jessica, have you ever done something really, really stupid?
I mean, I'm sure I have, but I try to like black those things out, just like forget about them.
I do too, but then I don't know. It's just in the middle of the night, you just start thinking about it. It's like, oh, remember that time in 8th grade when this happened? And it's like, oh, the anxiety.
I do that all the time, like all the time actually. And there's this like crazy thing that I don't know if it's real or not, but I try it and it's like there's supposedly if you like move your eyes really quickly back and forth from like one light source to another, thinking about the thing that gives you anxiety, it like moves it from one of your memory centers to a different memory center so that it like won't come up as much subconsciously like in your anxiety.
And
I
then
don't know if it
the anxiety comes up when I'm at like an amusement park having the memories of a lifetime. It's just like you're riding at Disney World and it's like, oh my God, here it all comes flooding in.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I just like, when you're like, why am I thinking about that weird thing I said to this person 6 years ago right now? And I'm like, all right, I'm going to just like, you know,
Don't
try this
ins-
eye thing and maybe it'll go away.
don't instill that in me. I've said so many weird things over the span of my lifetime that if I had to sit back and look back at it, I really hope if they say heaven's memories, but if that's what that is, and I'm just reliving every bad moment or every single moment in my life, which isn't the best. It's like, oh God.
I think I like learn from the really dumb stuff that I do. And the stuff that keeps me up at night is the stuff that like other people probably like never ever think about again.
I try to learn from it, but even before this conversation, and the reason why my right nostril is on fire is I got hot sauce up it, and I don't know how.
Oh, yeah. Have you ever made your own salsa?
No.
So like when I was a kid, I was making salsa and I was cutting up jalapenos and then I like brushed my eye and like the jalapeno juice like gets in your eyes or like under your fingernails. It's the same thing. It's just like fire and you're like, please someone help me. There's like nothing you can do. You just have to like wait it out.
It's like when you get a gift and you can't return it because there's no receipt for it.
I mean, that's when you just re-gift it, right? Or does that mean?
Whoa, you just changed the game for me.
I mean, if someone gives you something and they're like, yeah, I think that they're really going to like this and you can't return it, I would try to be like, well, who else would really like this? Like, why did they think I would like this? And then if I'm not going to like it, maybe I know someone else who will like it.
I mean, I guess that's better to be able to regift it rather than getting something like everything you want, or I guess everything for Christmas and then none of the stuff fits you or works. Like that was how my Christmas was last year, was that I literally asked for nothing because I didn't want anything. And I got a bunch of amazing stuff and then all of it was useless to me because we either needed to ship or get something else that came with it, or it was a different size, it didn't fit. And I was just like, well, this is like everything I opened up was like awesome. And then you go to try it, it's like, doesn't work. Ah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now this year, like you need to like ask for specific stuff so that you don't get just be like, what I've really always wanted is like I don't know, I want to build my own computer. So like if you could get me this like piece and you could buy me this piece and you could buy me that piece and you could like put it together or I don't know.
I don't have the capabilities to do that. Sadly, I tried to build my own PC. I put like at least my one of my best friends, his brother, they had a bunch of old computer parts. He used to build his own PCs and all these like amazing graphics cards and things that would make your computer run legit. And I was like, dude, I'm going to play World of Warcraft so hard. And then I built this PC. I fried the whole thing, everything, like $10,000 worth of laptop and computer equipment. I was like, what did I do? He's like, you're an idiot. And I'm like, oh God.
So maybe that was a bad example.
I try my
But
best to just be average. I feel like you set the bar low, people expect nothing.
I mean, that's one strategy. Or just like, have no expectations so that you always exceed them.
Just never get out of bed.
I mean, if I can have someone like bring me food and coffee, that would be a possibility. But,
You can do that if you had like a little bit of money saved away. Just hire a servant.
I mean, then they would be like, I don't want to get out of bed and serve this lazy person who sits in their bed all day.
Now, I know you went the archaeology route, but I'm going to tell you that I am now thinking about doing the butler route because that sounds like a lot of fun. Imagine you're just a butler to find out that, You're serving this guy basically your whole entire life. He ends up getting shot in front of a theater. Next thing you know, you're raising his kid, and the kid turns into Batman. There we go.
I mean, there you go. Life plans, right? That's perfect.
I mean, who's the real winner in Batman? Alfred, he doesn't have to do anything but just give directions from a computer like a million miles away.
That is true, but also I feel like Alfred's probably like the one like doing all the like oil changes and all the Batmobiles, and he's probably like making sure there's like food in the fridge, and then like Bruce comes home and he's all bloody and he's like laying on the floor, like Alfred's like down there scrubbing that stuff, like, but and then at the same time he's just like unlimited bank account because like that Batman's never like, Alfred, I saw on your like business expenses this week that you spent like $75 at Starbucks. Like, can we talk about that? Like,
you
no.
charged the company card.
Yeah, like, so that's probably like sweet, but I don't know. I feel like Batman's actually kind of like a bit of a man child, like he's not paying the electric bill, like he's not adulting. Like Alfred's doing all the adulting, and Bruce is just like out there like, doing whatever.
There's going to be a bunch of people listening that are like, is she talking trash on Batman?
I love Batman. I think Batman's awesome, but I'm just saying, like,
okay,
he gets,
well, how about
his wealth affords him that. Like, he can do that. He has enough money to not have to worry
Is it
about
better to have superpowers, or is it better to be incredibly rich?
Depends on the superpower.
I like to, if I'm going to ask somebody this question, I like to see what their superpowers they say, but there's always a downfall. Like, yeah, I would love to fly, but it has to be indoors. So then you're basically hitting the roof every single time. Then it's like, yeah, you can be invisible, but only when no one is looking at you. It's like, how does that help you?
Yeah, I think if I was going to have a superpower, actually, like, I would want the ability to, like, teleport.
Same.
Like, I don't want to sit in my car anymore. I want to be like, what would be really fun? Like, going to this place right now and just be able to think about it and, like, go there. I think that would be sweet.
Oh, so 2 places, not like in time.
I mean, it'd be cool to be able to teleport in time and space. This is another conversation I just had with a friend of mine. Whereas, like, if a genie gave you 3 wishes, I used to say, like, oh, I'd want to be able to, like, move in time and space and whatever. But I, like, throw all that out. I just want a TARDIS. Like, I just want Doctor Who's time machine. I just want a TARDIS. It's infinitely big on the inside. He has, like, a library and a swimming pool and, like, a million bedrooms. So he's, like, the biggest house that ever existed. And he can travel in time and space. So, I mean.
That's, like, too much power, but also that goes over my head because I've never seen Game of Thrones or Doctor Who.
Oh, you're missing out on some good fandoms.
I don't know about Game of Thrones. I feel like if you are too hooked to a TV show where you literally cry when something happens, everybody cried like 2 years ago about Game of Thrones, and I was like, I don't know what happened, but I can't handle this emotionally. We talk about anxiety. I can't do that.
I read the books like a couple years before the show came out. And so I was like a book fan, and so I was excited for the show to come out, but I think that like the show and the books are 2 totally different things. I feel the same way about like Lord of the Rings. Like like one of the things that actually makes me feel like crazy is that they took the Lord of the Rings books, which are these 3 like gigantic books, crammed them into 3 movies. And then they took The Hobbit, which is a book that's like 80 pages, and made it 3 long movies. I'm like, what? Like, why? So I just stick with the books now because I know the TV shows are going to disappoint me for the movies.
It's funny because I've never seen a full movie of Lord of the Rings. I don't think I've ever seen The Hobbit.
I didn't watch The Hobbit, like, just out of protest.
There's just, you don't like Elijah Wood?
I mean, he's not in The Hobbit, though. He's in The Lord of the Rings.
Isn't it the same thing?
No, it's like different places on the timeline. The Hobbit actually takes place before the whole Lord of the Rings series takes place.
You're like shattering all my illusions right now. Like, I fell asleep during The Matrix and I can't remember. Like, it felt like, now it feels like it's a 12-hour movie if I go to watch it, because I fell asleep during it when I was a kid, and I kept waking up at different parts, and I was like, when you fall asleep for like 10 minutes, it feels like 10 days or something. It's like that, but I was happening during the movie. I'm like, this thing has been on for like 30 years. My dad's like, dude, it's been fucking 15 minutes, man. Chill.
That sounds like some good sleep, though.
Like, that's how, if I ever get sleep, it happens. I sleep 10 minutes, and then it feels like I slept like 20 years. I don't know what it is about being an insomniac, but you just got to be productive with that. You got to dig a hole, or you got to do something like blog, write a blog. You'd have like 50,000 pages by the end of the first night.
There you go. No, it's micro napping. There's like a lot of famous like generals and stuff in history that like literally sleep 3 hours a day, and they do it in microbursts. So they'll sleep like 10 minutes, work 4 hours, sleep 20 minutes, work for a couple hours. And that's like how they are so high functioning and accomplish so much, is they just like, they only sleep in really tiny bursts.
The way my brain went with what you just said is that you're calling me Napoleon Bonaparte.
I mean, sure. I don't know if Napoleon was one of the people that used that technique, but if that's, if you want to climb, go over the Alps,
Is that what he
on
did?
elephants. Yeah, he one of his tactics, one of the things that he's known for losing is that he marched the army into the Alps in the middle of winter, which is like just not a tactically smart thing to do because it's cold, you can't get resupplied. It's not like a strategically good thing to do to march an army in the middle of winter into the mountains.
That sounds like a lot of work, but I think what I meant was you're calling me Napoleon Bonaparte because I also made the strudel popular.
There you go.
Either that or that was the Doughboy. I don't know which one.
I don't know.
I think there was a commercial with both of them included. Welcome to Out of the Blank podcast, Jessica. Tell everybody who you are.
So I'm Jessica. I am an archaeologist. I've been an archaeologist for over a decade now. My specialty is underwater and maritime archaeology. So I focus on ships, shipwrecks, and things that are under the ocean. I work for a university now, so I don't really get to do as much of the like fun field stuff that I used to do, but also like in archaeology, like kind of the higher you go up, the less time you actually get to like be in the dirt in the field digging.
Kind of like a cop when you're on the patrol for so long and then you get moved to the desk position and then like you're the owner, like an iRobot, where the guy's the commander in chief and he's telling Will Smith what to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but you get a badass shotgun under your desk, so when the robots come in, you just
Yeah, well, I deal with like old stuff, so robots aren't really like on my radar.
That's the best stuff, is the old stuff. It's where dinosaurs are. And I have the biggest question. So when you did field work, did you come across any abandoned ships, shipwrecks, airplanes underwater, anything like that?
All of the above.
Oh.
So I when I like was in graduate school, when I started out, I worked in Bermuda, and Bermuda is like this crazy thing because it's a volcanic like island with a reef around it. So forever, like since the the beginning of exploration, and we call it contact. We don't call it discovery because there was people living in the northern hemisphere in the Americas before Europeans contacted them. Bermuda was like a stopover point, right? So like you ran out of water, you ran out of food, your ship got damaged, like you could stop at Bermuda before you kind of continued on. But because there's like one way in and one way out, because there's all this like coral reef, tons and tons and tons and tons of shipwrecks like crashed there. There's just tons of shipwrecks there. And then during World War II, there was an air base there too. So there's like airplanes, there's ships, there's like everything is out there. So that was really cool because we got to work on this really cool ship that was fleeing from the Irish potato famine. And so all the people on there were leaving Ireland, trying to come to the US to, get away from that. And they had this accident in Bermuda and most of them lived. But then there's this like big fight about what to do with them and like who should pay for them and like who should house them, because obviously they were poor. They were fleeing from poverty, trying to like go to a better life. So they didn't have, anything. So that was cool. And then there's just like amazing diving there. So there's just like all kinds. There's like Civil War blockade runners there. There's like ships from like the 1600s there. There's like planes that crashed off the runway. Like there's just all sorts of cool stuff there.
So you actually went to the Bermuda Triangle or just Bermuda?
I mean, I guess technically Bermuda is the tip of the triangle, right? But I don't know if I've ever been in the Bermuda Triangle. I don't believe in the Bermuda Triangle. It's just like a place that gets a lot of storms.
Yeah,
So,
because I did a whole I did a research paper on the Bermuda Triangle, and they were talking about that they think a lot of the disturbances and a lot of the cases where ships have gone missing when they sail through it is not just because of wrecks, but also because there happens to be a lot of smuggling spots in the Bermuda Triangle where pirates, like you ever see in Pirates of the Caribbean where they fall on that island and they have that smuggler's den and there's like alcohol and everything all hooked in there. Yeah, well, that's like a real thing that people used to do is they used to smuggle and keep different beers and wines to hide from like the sea police or whatever you want to call them. On these islands. So they would say that like if a tourist or somebody was sailing through the Bermuda Triangle and they lost contact, not only because the magnetic frequency, I guess, that goes on in there kind of seems like it disrupts a little bit. You can't tell where like, your compass, your kind of electronics go a little funky. That these people that were smuggling, whatever treasure, whatever they want to call it, they would capture these tourists, and that's why the tourists would go lost. And I was like, that's fucking fascinating, because they always say it's like the sea of monsters or something where like a giant squid comes out of the water and crashes stuff. But I'm like, either they crash or pirates got to them or people that were smuggling stuff. And same thing with there's Amelia Earhart always gets the recommendations and stuff of who went down over the Bermuda Triangle. It's the first thing you think of is Amelia Earhart. Well, there's another case where a guy was flying his team of, I think it was like 5 people in his crew on different airplanes lined up, and then everyone got disconnected, or the electro whatever kind of split it all apart, to where they couldn't communicate to each other. They're breaking in and out, and they were running out of gas, and they lost contact with them. But like, it was this weird kind of like just planes went missing. They'd never been able to find the wrecks, and that's the same thing. But I'm like, it is a large area of water. If you drop a pocket watch in the ocean, you're probably never getting that thing back ever. But out of all that area that they call the triangle, they've never been able to like find certain things. I don't know if you are able to kind of attest to that.
well, so you have to remember that like the ocean is huge and like mostly unexplored, right? So like even though we think that like we know everything or whatever, there's still so much of the ocean floor that has been unmapped and unexplored. And the area that's kind of like known as the Bermuda Triangle has a couple like things going on. One, there at one edge of it, there's something called the Sargasso Sea. So if you look at the Atlantic Ocean, there's like currents and they go in a big circle and the winds go in the same circle. But in the middle, where there's not as much current and there's not as much wind, is called the Sargasso Sea. So if you're sailing a ship and you get pushed in the Sargasso Sea, like there is a chance that you are going to not make it out of there because there's not enough wind or current to move your ship out of this kind of like middle area where there's not any forces to push you. Um, the other thing with like some of the early aviation stuff, like you were talking about, is that same area is subject to this like crazy phenomenon. And I've only seen it once, and I saw it in Bermuda, where the water and the sky get so still and there's no clouds that you literally cannot make out a horizon. So like the blue water just blends into the blue sky. And you can't, like, there's no way to tell up from down, top from bottom. Like, you cannot see a horizon. And it's nuts. Like, it feels like the Twilight Zone because it's just, there's not a ripple on the water. There's not a cloud in the sky. You look out, you don't know what's up and what's down and where the horizon is. So if you're flying a plane in that, you could easily go too high, or you could crash into the ocean and not realize that you're about to crash into the ocean until you hit the water, because you have no visual cues. And that happens at night sometimes too, where like pilots can't tell the difference between the sky and the sea. And so, like that is one of the extenuating circumstances. The other thing is, I don't know if you've seen on the news, like right now when they talk about the Sahara sands that come off of the desert and cross the Atlantic, and they kind of
Yeah.
are part of the thing that causes hurricanes. Imagine that you are a ship captain and you plan your trips, like your global trips, where you're going from the Caribbean to New England to Europe down to Africa, around these like seasonal storms, like hurricane season. But you mess up somehow, you leave a little late, you leave a little too early, and there's no like weather predictors, right? And a hurricane gets you right when you're in this huge area where the Bermuda Triangle is. Hurricanes can generate waves that are 80, 90 counts of people that in a single wave, it just takes the whole ship out. So like they don't get a chance to like call for help. They don't get a chance to do anything. It's just like a hurricane comes up really quick. Like I'm in Pensacola. So Sally just hit us and we literally had like 24 hours notice that it was going to be a category 2 hurricane. It went from being a tropical depression to being like a huge storm in like a day. So if you don't have modern technology to tell you that this is about to happen, and you're just like in the middle of the ocean, you're just like going on your merry way, a hurricane comes up and could take your ship out in seconds and just sink you right to the ground.
Kind of like in 2012 where the dad's on the cruise ship and he's like, I
Yeah.
love you, son. And he says goodbye. And then this giant tsunami like wave hits the whole cruise ship and just flips the whole thing over. I'm like, really, it leads into a giant question I want to ask about the Titanic too. Cause I have problems with that movie on one aspect. I'm not a selfish person, but if somebody told me that this ship is going down and there's men or there's women and children going first, I'm going to be a little bit heated. That's my problem with the movie. I feel like there should have been some more people that are like, what are you talking about? I don't know. I guess that's just me. Probably would react differently in the situation, but more on the concept of like never go on a cruise ship. That brought me a lot of anxiety, what you just said. But the factor of like the ocean, like for instance, you mentioned the hurricane Sally just hit you. So where I live is in a beach town. We're surrounded by water on one side and surrounded by water on the other. So I have the bay on one side and the ocean on the other. What I thought was like, we're not used to hurricanes because they mostly go onto the water and they go off into the sea where it never really touches us. But we had this tropical storm that then got bumped up to a category 4. And I was like, what's going on? It was serious, but a lot of people are like, it's raining hard out. I'm like, it's not rain. If you actually pay attention to what it was sand that was moving at like 65 miles an hour. Literally, it could tear your skin off, it felt like. And then rain. But it wasn't rain. It was the ocean water that was getting picked up and then just thrown all around town. It was freaking insane. Storms are crazy. Don't be on a ship when one happens.
Yeah, no. Even like during Hurricane Sandy in New England, there was like a replica ship and they tried to sail like away before the storm hit to like escape it. And that exactly is what happened to them. Like a couple big waves took them out and just sank them straight down. And it was like really deep too. It was in like 2,000 feet of water or something crazy. Like it sank them super quick, super deep. So it's like, it's still a risk factor, but like now it's not as dangerous as it used to be because we have like weather monitoring and like better communications. But yeah, I mean, it's still like the ocean is a dangerous place, like the ocean can change in a minute and it doesn't care about you or like what you're doing. Like the ocean is, it's its own dynamic force. And I think it's funny because I always like, I'll run into people who are like, yeah, like someday I'm going to buy a sailboat. I'm just going to sail around the world. I'm like, cool. So like, have you ever sailed before? Oh, no. I'm like, have you ever been on a sailboat before?
You just got to commit to never seeing them again. Anytime
like,
anybody tells me they're going out to sea, I'm like, all right, well, it was nice knowing you.
Yeah. I'm like, I mean, it's like, there's definitely people who can do it, who've been sailing for a long time and they've done like a bunch of like longer sails and whatever. And they're like, yeah, like now I'm going to go do this. But it's the people who are like, yeah, when I retire, I'm just going to buy a boat and sail around the world. And I'm like, okay, but like, have you ever been on a sailboat for a week? It's like the same thing with people who buy tiny houses. Like I get it. But like, maybe go and like rent one and like live in one for a couple weeks before you decide like, I'm going to give up everything that I have and move into like a tiny house or.
Well, here's where my brain connected when you say like, have you ever sailed before? And like first time you're going to go sailing around the world and your first time on a boat, 51st dates. It was such bullshit. The love story might have been true, but when Adam Sandler starts sailing off without knowing where to go, he's just going to go to Alaska and go to the Arctic or whatever. And I'm like, hang on a second. Have you ever sailed before besides rebuilding this boat?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why he brings the dad with him, right? Because the dad was like a deep sea fisherman. So like, he brings the dad. Maybe that's why. I don't know. They do like a pretty big gap. Like they're able to like just write off like a lot of problems in that storyline by like just jumping forward like 7, 8, 9 years, right? Because they're like, she's like, oh, I kind of remember you. And then like the next time we see them, they have like a kid. Like
Yeah,
There was like a lot that happened in between there where we don't know how they solve like all of these problems because they're just like, oh, time jump. Movies do
yeah.
that all the time.
Well, I
Their
mean,
favorite one is like rich people, right? Like they're like, there's all these problems. Oh, we'll just solve it by making them rich.
now let me tell you something. The only thing I really felt bad for is when she woke up on the ship and they played the videotape, and then she gets up on like at the ending of the movie, and her son hugs her. I was like, imagine being the kid, not realizing, like, or I guess realizing that your mom will never ever remember who you are without a videotape being played. Like that is fucking awful. And then at the same time, coming from the mom's perspective or the woman's perspective, where you're waking up not knowing who the hell, where the hell you are, you're freaked out 24/7. I've woken up after like when I was sleepwalking or something. Everything is, oh my god, it's like reverse opposite, where it's like that's normal, isn't it? Reverse opposite. Well, everything was reversed. Like I was laying in bed, usually my door's to the left, and then everything was flipped. Door was behind me to the right, and I'm like, where the hell am I? But I don't know.
I for her, like, so I have kids, and I was like thinking, like, I can't imagine what it would be like to wake up and be pregnant, or to wake up and not know that you're pregnant on the day that you actually go into labor. Like, that would be terrifying.
Yeah, you could have a heart attack and die, and then you're on a boat. What are you gonna do when you're on a boat?
I mean, that's like a whole separate issue.
Sharks.
Yeah. Actually, sharks are cool. Sharks are awesome.
No, they're not. Have you ever seen Jaws?
Yeah, but have you ever like seen a shark in real life?
I have.
Like
I've
in the
been.
ocean when you're swimming?
I used to be a jet ski guide, and I saw a
Yeah.
hammerhead right next to my jet ski. It was majestic as hell, but it scared the shit out of me.
I like people, that's like one of the number one questions that I get asked when people find out what I do is if I'm afraid of sharks. And the answer is no, because like they don't care about what you're doing, especially when you're underwater. Like they just don't care. Like you're noisy because you're blowing bubbles, you're swimming around. Most of the time you like don't even know they're there until the gramoras, the like fish that hang out on their stomachs, kind of come and like check you out to see if like you have anything on your stomach they can eat. Um, but I think I love sharks. Like they're great. They just like hang out, they cruise around, like they don't bother you.
What's
I
the
don't
one
know.
thing that bothers you? Like, all right, so take me through, I guess, your most memorable trip doing diving, because I'm curious, because I've been underwater, but if you go to my oceans down here, everything's green. You can't see 2 feet in front of your face.
So like the coolest dive I've ever done was actually in the kelp forest in California. So it's cold, but it's like clear and beautiful. And it is like being in a forest because the kelp plants can be like, you know, they grow from the ocean bottom to the surface and they're big and like seals and stuff, like they're all in there. Most of the diving I've done as a professional has been in black water, zero visibility, um, where you're like kind of you're measuring by like hand lengths or you're like shining a light really close just to be able to like see what you're doing. So like I've dove with alligators before. I've dove with like poisonous snakes. I've dove in like really high current, no visibility dives. So like those are work dives, you know, like those are like, hey, there's a ship here, we need to go check it out, or like, hey, we think there's something here, something came up on our equipment. We use remote sensing equipment. So side scan sonar takes a sonar image of the bottom of the ocean or a river or a lake. A magnetometer is like a giant metal detector. It does the same thing. You tow it behind the boat and it gives you like a feedback. So you identify like potential targets that way. So those dives are like work. The fun dives, like the really nice dives, are always like vacation. Like you don't, you know, if it's in like a beautiful, like if it's in like the Bahamas and it's beautiful, you know, people go there and move there to dive for fun. So they tend to find stuff that's there. It's the like stuff in the crappy places, like the places where the diving isn't pretty or fun, that like the shipwrecks are, or the stuff that's been undisturbed. Everyone thinks that every ship that ever sank has like treasure on it, which like I don't really understand because, you
It's
know,
the doubloons.
well, yeah, but like, so for me, like where I live, right, we just had a hurricane. There's tons of boats that are like washed up in the marsh and that sank and that were destroyed during the hurricane. And then I'm like, okay, so you see all these boats, right, that got destroyed. That happened in history too. Did every single one of these ships that just sank right now, did they have treasure on them? Like, No. So why would all these ships in history have treasure on them? But they just think they do. So the ones that are in the hard to get places and the like icky water, those ones are less disturbed by people. We can actually find out a lot more about them. So one of the coolest wrecks I dove um, was in pretty shallow waters, like 10 feet of water in an estuary. Is a Civil War ship. It was a maintenance ship, so it never like sailed. They put it there and then they loaded up all the equipment so that other ships that need repairs could come pull up to it and get repairs. It was like a floating machine shop. And then after the war, it was just kind of abandoned. So it just it sank. Storms hit it, natural processes, and it sank into the river. So that site was super cool because there's all kinds of stuff on it and all kinds of really cool stuff to see and to study. But
Do you
it's
ever have
not,
a fear of like, because sometimes when you go across one of those ships or something, a wrecked ship or even a wrecked airplane underwater, your biggest concern in your head's kind of going, this could also be a burial place for someone.
so we have a no disturbance policy. Most archaeologists, most underwater people, we don't just like pull stuff up. Because like we have a moral and ethical obligation to make sure that anything we bring to the surface that we can conserve. So if you find like an iron object and you bring it from the ocean floor up to land and you don't like immediately put it into water and have a conservation plan, it'll just turn into dust. Like it'll just rust away really, really quickly. Same thing with a lot of people find like old canoes that are, a couple hundred years old. And as soon as those things dry out, they're just going to crumble into nothing. They're preserved because no oxygen is interacting with them. So they're in the mud, they're in the water, and they're preserved. So archaeologists, we don't pull stuff up until we have a plan. So for example, like if we were to find a canoe and we're like, yeah, we want to conserve this, we want it to go to this museum, we would like build a giant tank that would fit it. We would put the canoe into the tank the second it hit the surface so that it didn't dry out. And then we have all these other processes and conservation methods to make sure that that thing doesn't just like dry up and sink apart. So in that kind of process, we like do a ton of research and say like, did anybody die on this vessel? Was this a military vessel? Like what happened with this? And there's a whole group of archaeologists. They work for the Department of POW and MIA Accounting Agency. That is all they do globally. They look for airplane wrecks, shipwrecks, any place where a service member might have gone missing in action or was killed. And then they have really specific strategies to go in and find those remains and return them to the United States. And even if it's somebody from like, World War II, and they have no direct descendants that are still living, they'll find their grandchildren, their aunts, uncles, cousins, like someone related to them to return that to. And sometimes that looks like, all they found was like a dog tag or something like that, but they'll figure it out. And that is what they're specifically looking for. So,
That's
our
pretty amazing because, like, I went to the Pearl Harbor Museum and in Hawaii, and so you get to go above where the ships are that they left underwater that are preserved. And I went up there with a World War II veteran. Nobody in relation to me, he just happened to be on the same boat. But the guy was talking to him. He's like, "What we do is when you pass away, we can get your ashes and we can put you in the ship with the rest of your um, comrades and stuff." And I thought that was pretty amazing too, like just to be able to kind of let him rest with the people that he served with, his friends that he had lost. And I was like, this is a big thing a lot of people don't think about. They think about finding something and the first thing they want to do is take everything and try and find what's good out of it. And you don't understand you could be disturbing a resting place for somebody, which is like, you gave me a good idea for a movie, which is dumb after everything I just said. That kind of seemed like, oh, he's kind of intelligent, but it's more like the concept of like, you mentioned that if it doesn't get put in the water, as soon as you get onto land, it's just going to turn into dust. If there's a killer on a boat and it's off of a sea diving venture, you could have the guy like, I'm going to stop this dude before he kills us all. And you swing like a crowbar and the thing hits the killer, but it turns into dust. And it's like, oh shit, I forgot to put it in. Fucking someone write that down. Tom Cruise, you're starring in it. All right. But then like the seriousness of it is though, a lot of people, they want to find something amazing. Like when you probably same thoughts you had on your first adventure is like, oh my God, I want to find something that's going to get my name in a book, going to do something, but then you also have to realize it's all about the experience too, and the memories you create from doing that. And also preserving things. Like there are people that have lost family members that are out there, or even on a ship or something, even people there's a ship, ghost ships all the time. If you look up those wrecks and everything that happened, people just go missing and they don't know where the hell they went. There's still two guys from like, I think 2014 was when it happened, that just went missing. They don't know if there was a whole murder scheme behind it or anything, but that happens. And finding that, you got to understand whether they're a service member or not. You have to honor that because that is their final resting place.
Definitely. And I think that, professional archaeologists, like that's something that we really take into consideration. And we try to be really respectful of like every site that we interact with. And that kind of the people who get into it because they think they're going to get rich or they're going to get famous, are where we run into like a lot of problems. With that said, like some of the most like amazing archaeologists and historians that I know are people who became historians or archaeologists like after they retired. So, they had some like career for, 20, 30 years, retired and was like, I'm really passionate about, Civil War history, or I'm really passionate about World War II history. And they generate like some of the best books, they do some of the best research, but it's because it's coming from a place of like respect and passion. There is a whole other group of people that like, they go scuba diving every single day. And all they're doing is they're just looking for treasure or something they could sell or some way to get rich. Well, it's crazy because like fossils, like shark's teeth are a huge thing. And it's so like, it's great. Like you walk the beach and find them, but there's people who like dig out like protected marine sanctuary areas where there's endangered species to find shark's teeth.
You got me so excited. I said Atlantis. I don't know if you heard that. And then you said, but then and I thought you were going into the Atlantis thing. I'm like, somebody fucking found Atlantis. I was so, okay. But yeah, shark teeth are cool. I mean, you find those on the beach like fossil hunting.
It would be cool if Atlantis was real. Like it would be cool. But
Jason Momoa underwater.
Exactly. Like I'm down for that Atlantis. Like when he throws all the trash back up on the shore, like I'm in for that. But
that's a big thing too. In my town is ridiculous. Like we have a sign that says leave only your footprints because people just throw cigarettes like on the beach and sand and stuff. But the water, I mean, being in the bay 24/7 that I used to do jet skis and stuff, you don't know how much stuff I came across. I got hit by a saw. Like somebody just threw one of those saws, just something you chop fucking wood with, and just threw it right in the bay. I'm like, there's kids that come out here. I saved Randy Orton's life one time because our bay is only like waist deep and he was going to dive off a pontoon boat. And I'm like, you're going to snap your friggin' neck. He's like, what do you mean? And then I showed him how deep it was. He was like, thanks, bro. I need to, go back to my wrestling career.
Well, I mean, maybe that's why he thought it was okay to dive off. Got hit in the head too many times already. No, I'm sure he's a very nice person. Kind of. But no, the trash is like a whole other crazy issue. Like I have friends who do like deep water science, so they use like ROVs and submersibles to go look at like the Mariana Trench and stuff, and there's like they're going deeper than any man-made vehicle has ever gone before, and they're like recording it, and they get down and there's like a freaking Coke can because like we dump so much trash into the ocean. It's disgusting. I mean, here, like I worked with a nonprofit organization here, an environmental nonprofit organization. And like, that is 90% of what we ended up doing is just like picking up trash off the side of the road, off the beach, out of the ocean. There's like whole diving groups that all they do is they go around and they pull out abandoned fishing nets, abandoned crab pots. Like, I have done a bunch of work here with the Park Service, and people just throw tires in the ocean. And they're like, oh yeah, that's my like secret fishing spot. I'm like, no, it's not. It's just trash that you threw in the ocean. Like, it's a really, really huge problem. Like, and there will be more plastic in the ocean by 2025 than there are fish. Like, it's just a fact. Like, there's that much trash in the ocean.
Is there a way that we are trying our best besides just having an elite group of people and trying to make people more aware of the fact of pollution. Because like I'm not an environmentalist, but I do kind of talk like one a little bit when it comes to trying to conserve this planet for future generations. Mostly like I've been trying to figure out if there's a way to I guess molecularly change like some mycology type stuff using fungi to be able to, because we can use fungus and all this type of stuff to eat plastic. So I'm like, is there a way to be able to do that to maybe change it to a level of eating oil that is soaking in our oceans? I mean, oil spills happen a lot, probably. I mean, I don't know how many times in my town like you're fueling up a jet ski with gasoline or something. It's a big fine if you get gas in the water, but it happens so much. Like we had a pump rip one time, like 4 years ago, and it just spilled all this constant gas into the water. And I'm like, this is like, it's shit stays. People are like, look, it's a rainbow. That's not good. I mean, that's literally like killing a lot of things that are in that water. And we have a lot of fish off our dock and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about specifically like that stuff.
That ringtone gave me anxiety. I'm sorry.
I'm
No,
sorry. I didn't realize it was
it's
on.
funny because that's my grandmom's ringtone, but every time that thing went off, you knew you were in trouble. It's like,
I literally never ever even have my phone on ring, like ever.
it's an
And I
anxiety-filled podcast.
sorry. But yeah, I mean, trash in the ocean gives me anxiety. So no, there's like some stuff that can be done, but like most of it is like at an individual level, just like doing your best, right? Like when you can say no to plastic, don't have plastic. When you can recycle, recycle. Like do your bananas that grow outside need to be individually wrapped in plastic? Like do your potatoes that literally grow in the dirt need to be individually wrapped in plastic? So like there's that part of it.
That's like when sliced bread was banned in our country for a little while. Like they were just like, why are we slicing bread? Well, we're just going to give them the loaf. Don't pre-slice it for them because this is wasting too much time. We're in the middle of freaking World War right now.
Or like, but like there's like a whole thing where like people buy pre-peeled oranges, right? Like
That's like asking somebody to pick your fucking crab for you. Pick the fucking crab and eat it. Don't sit there and make me pick it. That gets me more than anything. Oh my God. A pre-peeled orange? I didn't even know they made that.
yeah, they have pre-peeled oranges that come in plastic containers. And I'm like, if only the orange came in a biodegradable natural container that causes like no harm to the environment.
Wait, you mean like Dole, like the ones that are soaking in the juice?
No, I mean like some, like actual like just an orange that's been peeled that they put in a plastic container and then they sell it at the grocery store.
It's not even that hard to peel an orange. And that's like my favorite part of doing it. I feel like a monkey when he's trying to get a prize out of something.
Yeah, so there's that. But then like it's also kind of the obligation of like companies, which asking a company to do anything is like not, like gonna happen. But for example, like diapers, right? The people who make diapers, they have the ability to 100% recycle diapers. They just choose not to do it because the logistics of collecting the diapers is inconvenient. And it's the same thing with like oil companies. Oil companies and pipelines, they spill and they bust all the time. But it's just inconvenient for them to monitor them to the standard which they are able to do it. It costs them money, so they just don't want to do it. So then they actively lobby and try to not do it. So it's not that like, it's not that we can't prevent these problems, is that the companies who have the ability and the money to do it are like choosing not to do it because that saves their bottom dollar without thinking about long-term consequences. So like there are enzymes that they have developed that can process oil. There are ways for them to clean it up. It's just expensive. And so they don't want to do it. If no one's putting pressure on them to do it, then they're not going to do it. The same thing with like the fungus that eats the plastic. Like they're developing this amazing technology or this amazing ability to do this, which we like desperately, desperately need. But if not enough people put pressure on, the National Science Foundation to fund this kind of research, or individual companies that produce plastic to fund this kind of research, then like, why would the company do it? So like there are solutions, but like as individuals, we need to put pressure on the companies who can pay for it to take care of the problem.
they made these there's a few restaurants down here that made these straws that are biodegradable, so like if they ever get like in the ocean or get trashed around, they just degrade, kind of like cereal straws, like the things that are made of cereal, but you always, before actually drinking the milk that would make it taste like the cereal, you just eat the straw. So it was like fucking didn't work. But the biodegradable sea straws thing that they had, so you wouldn't see that sad video of a turtle with a straw up his nose. People were doing it for like a month, and then they just got lazy, like this is too much work, and then they went back to the old stuff. And I'm like, that's the issue, is that you give up on it before the change happens. If the change isn't immediate, then nobody gives a shit.
Yeah, it's definitely, I like to say that like a lot of our problems come from like a culture of convenience, you know? Like if you're like, hey, guess what? That fast food place that you go to, like they're poisoning you. And they're like, okay, cool, but like it's the only fast food place on my drive home from work. So like, what am I supposed to eat? I'm like, well, you could go to the grocery store and you could cook something. They're like, no, that's too inconvenient. Like it's too hard. It's too much work. You know, like a little bit of individual effort, I think goes a long way. And hopefully I think with like COVID and everyone having to be at home and like kind of like change their day-to-day activities, like I think a lot of people are seeing that. And you know, like how sourdough bread has like become a thing where before people were like, oh my God, I could never cook a loaf of bread. Like what a pain in the butt. And now they're like, oh, I cook a loaf of sourdough every day.
I'm not gonna lie, at the age of 22, I just learned how to use the oven probably 2 weeks ago. It was just never in my wheelhouse to want to use it. I was always a hot pocket or taquito man. Then after years and years and years of just tuna salad or bake or boiling my chicken, I was like, I would like to try this. And I did it. And I cooked deer meat the other day, and it was fucking delicious.
Sounds good. Yeah, now you can also do like grilled cheese, quesadillas, other things that are convenient, you know?
Microwave can do that.
No, you got to get it like crunchy. If it's just like you put it in the microwave, it's just soggy.
Yeah.
You got to get
Oh, here's where
crunchy.
we divide on this, because let me tell you, you're the type of person that puts the taquitos in the oven. I'm the type that goes in the microwave, and you're supposed to roll them when you put them in the microwave. No, 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 no. Put it in 15 minutes, walk away, go do something else, come back. The ones on the end, hot as hell. But then you get towards the middle, and it's just ice cold. But you eat it anyway because you're savage. That's what you do.
Yeah, no, I can't do that.
What made you decide to take this initiative into see underwater archaeology, or even taking your first dive? Because I'm really interested. Like we talked about a little bit, well, I mentioned a little bit about the Titanic. My thing I like to do when I'm learning about history, or when I'm watching something, or I'm trying to relate to something, is I want to put myself into that person's shoes and understand what's going on in there, such as like a ship going down. What are your thoughts that are going through that? When you're doing a dive or something, especially, like I want to learn about why you got even into it, and also your experience. You try and think, like, if you ever come across anything, like, you know how people try and like envision what happened of a scenario,
Yeah.
kind of like CSI or something. Like, I think it happened this way. Okay, so if I was the ship, it went like do that. Like, you ever,
Yeah. So first, I wanted to be an archaeologist since I was a little kid. Like I was one of those like annoying kids who was like, but how do we know that? Like you're telling me that we know this thing about history, but like how do we know that?
Yeah.
And you know, people would be like, oh well, like it was written down. And I'm like, okay, but like what about all the people who didn't know how to read and write? And they're like, oh, well, you know, we know it because they told us about it. I'm like, but how do we know that they were telling the truth?
I'm in
And
the
so
same boat as you right now.
yeah.
Everything in history I thought that was true is all horseshit. I'm finding out, and my illusions have been shattered.
Well, so like the thing is like, you know, if you're the person who's writing down history, like what is motivating you to write down history? Like you're writing down your experience, which like, let's talk about like the founding fathers. Okay. So I worked at,
I've been talking about George Washington a lot the past few episodes. Let me tell
so
you.
like I worked at George Washington's childhood home. I was an archaeologist
Cool.
at his childhood home for a while. So, okay. So like George Washington is like problematic for a whole lot of reasons. Pushing all that aside, if I'm George Washington and I'm writing stuff down, I'm only writing from my perspective. I'm not writing from my wife's perspective, any women, any minorities, any enslaved person, anybody who works for me. So for so long, the only value that we put on historic narrative was on famous white men. Like that's just, you know, all the founding fathers, famous white men. all the generals from World War II, famous white men. All the Civil War generals, famous white men. We put all the emphasis of the historic narrative on these famous white men. And so obviously there's millions of other people with different experiences that their contribution to the historic record is just as valuable. So for me, that's why I wanted to become an archaeologist, because one, archaeologists verify what is written, right? If you say at like the most basic level, if you're like, this is where the house was, this is where the kitchen was, this is where the stable was, and this is, you know, where we grew our crops. Like an archaeologist can go physically look in the dirt and verify that those things are true. And a lot of times that's not true. Or they leave stuff off, you know, they leave off that there was like a smoking shed, or that there was, you know, quarters for enslaved people, or, you know, like they just leave stuff off because to them it's not important.
And plus, it looks like they're going to look bad if they show that off.
Well, I think like a good way to equate it is like some of the questions that we want to answer, like, would be the equivalent of like, what do you mean they didn't keep every Walmart receipt that they had for like their entire life? Like, how are we supposed to know where they bought their clothes and like what kind of food they were buying? And like, you know, like it just wasn't important to them. They thought like, oh, this is the receipt from the stable of the guy who put my horseshoes on. And as archaeologists, we're like, well, what were the horseshoes made of? Who was the stable owner? So, you know, we're verifying all those things that kind of like seem really mundane in like day-to-day life, but are important questions to like get a good kind of like perspective of history. I went into underwater archaeology and maritime archaeology because as I was like looking at stuff and like pondering these questions, the questions that were really interesting to me were like more like global processes, specifically around like the transatlantic slave trade and, you know, like how things worked, why things happened the way that they happened, and all of that kind of pushed me towards like maritime archaeology. Ships until really like World War II are the most advanced piece of technology on the earth, right? If we think about what drives technological innovation, a lot of times it's like warfare or it's commerce or it's transportation, and that is ships, right? Like if you are in the Caribbean and you want, you know, some product, it has to come across the ocean on a ship. So that ship is like the, you know, it is international communication. It is international travel. It is international trade and commerce. So I was like, okay, though that's the big questions. Like that's where I want to be. I want to be where I can answer these like big questions. So that's kind of what brought me to maritime. And then that's when I did my first dive. When I was like, I want to study underwater archaeology. What are the tools that I need to get there? Like, how am I going to get there? How am I going to do that? And the first step was go get an open water scuba diving certification. So I did that as an undergrad, and then I worked for a couple of years, and then I went to graduate school, and now I work. And, you know, like, so those are the things that brought me there. In terms of like day-to-day process, like what it looks like when you're like figuring out the questions, there's really two different kinds of archaeology. There is academic archaeology, and then there's commercial archaeology. And so commercial archaeology is the archaeologist that you're like, we're going to build a building here next month. We need an archaeologist to come out and tell us if we're going to impact anything that's historically significant. And so that is most archaeology that happens because that's what there's money to fund. And that is like quick. It's like an overview. If they find something really like significant, it can delay the construction process, which is generally why like construction worker or like construction companies hate archaeologists. They're like, oh, hey, like where you wanted to put that shopping mall, there's actually like a burial ground there. We need to like investigate it more and like study it more before it gets destroyed because you're going to build on top of it. So those ones, you don't necessarily get to dive as deep into the like questions, like the minute information. Academic archaeology, which is archaeology that's sponsored by like museums, universities, individual foundations, that's when you like really get to dive deep. And sometimes the questions that you're answering and like the clues that you're collecting, it can take years. Like it can take, you know, people will spend their whole career at like one archaeology site. So a good example is like what we were talking about, Ferry Farm, which is George Washington's childhood home. the house was demolished at some point. So for like 10 years, they were just looking for where the footprint of the house was, how big it was, like where it sat. Like they had a general idea, but then like they were just looking for like where that house was. So in that process, you know, like they found the house, they found some outbuildings, there was a smokehouse there, but then they found all sorts of other crazy stuff. So the craziest thing they found was like all these wig curlers, which I know sounds like crazy, but what they are these like wooden stools that were used to curl those like white wigs.
Yeah. That's
and so
because of
like,
syphilis, by the way.
yeah,
The white wigs.
right. So they were like, why are all these wig curlers here? Like, what's going on? Like, when George Washington lived here, he wasn't yet old enough or participating in any kind of like field that he would be required to wear a wig. Like, why are all these wig curlers here? So like the hypothesis that they had was that someone who was living on the property was curling and maintaining wigs as like a form of income for other people in the town. So, you know, like there's things like that where you're like, this seems really weird and minute, but it
That's
actually is
fucking
really
interesting.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really interesting. So there's like that. And then there, you know, there's all kinds of other little like minute stuff. Like in the smokehouse, the soil that they excavated from the smokehouse, they sent out, it's called a paleoethnobotanist. And what that person does is they look through a microscope at soil. They pull out seeds, they pull out any kind of like preserved remains of animals, and they can literally recreate like the season based on what kind of pollen is present, the seeds, like what they were growing based on the seeds that they're there, what kind of animals they were cooking, like all this information from like a preserved soil sample.
Fucking
Um,
science, man.
yeah, it's crazy. So in terms of like day-to-day clues, like, yeah, like I might be sitting in one spot digging a hole really slowly for like 2 weeks. And every layer that I dig, I take a soil sample and I take copious notes about every layer and I map in every single artifact that I find. And so like that individual moment that day, it might not like seem like that groundbreaking. But then when I take all the notes from all the holes that have been dug and like look at them on like a big picture, I can be like, oh wow,
It's like a
there was all the
timeline.
yeah, there's all these wig curlers, what's that about? Or, you know, there's all these like bottle caps, what's that about? Or, oh, you know what, look, there was no other remains here, but like we found nails in this shape, there must have been a building here. So, you know, like you don't get to necessarily see the big picture right away, but like over time you find out all this information. So that's kind of, I mean, it's a slow burn, but it's worth it.
Shit, man. I gotta prioritize life here. I gotta figure out what the fuck I want to do. That sounds interesting as hell. Thought about porn, and now I'm thinking this.
I mean, it's one of like if you were really, or anyone who was listening was like really interested in participating or like experiencing archaeology, you can go to an archaeological field school. And just try it out. Like you can, at Montpelier, which is James Madison's presidential plantation, you can go there for a week and you dig every day with the archaeologist. They treat you just like any other archaeology student. You live on the property, you do tours of the mansion, you get like a whole perspective. There's a Civil War battlefield there. There is the presidential plantation. There's enslaved quarters. There's like all these different historic sites on this one property, and you get to participate in the digging, the screening, the documenting, the artifact cleaning, the analysis. And it's like a good test to test it out. One of the things I tell my undergrad students is like, do not go to graduate school until you've gone to at least like 2 field schools, because if you're going to dedicate your life to this, like you better make sure you really like the like slow days, you know, the like digging in the dirt in the 100-degree heat days as much as you like the like big discovery days.
I don't mind it. I've seen holes.
I like it, but I might be a crazy person.
I don't think so. I think it's crazy how we talked so much about wanting to be lazy and have a butler, and then we started talking about don't be lazy and don't pollute.
I mean, I just haven't gone on a vacation in like a year because of COVID. So I'm like getting to that place of where like I really like I haven't been on a plane in a year. I haven't left my town that I live in right now in 7 months because of COVID. And so I'm just like burned out. I'm just like ready. I'm like, I need a vacation. I need to go somewhere where I don't have to do anything and just like read books and lay in the sun.
The last vacation I think I ever went on when I was like 16 to Hawaii. That's about it. I don't like traveling. I don't know. I get on a plane, and if there's not a baby on it, I just don't get on the plane. I know it
Well,
sounds dumb, but the way my brain works is if there's a baby on an airplane, then it's not going down, because who would take the life of a baby?
that is, I mean, I can
Everyone's got
see.
superstitions, damn it.
Yeah, that's a good superstition. So my spouse, my husband is a pilot. Um, and so like I see all the good and the bad of flying, and
I have so
for the
many
most
questions
part,
about flight. Let me tell you, I played Flight Simulator, and I want to know
it's
how much
not
that game is bullshit.
it's like flying is pretty safe, like in the scheme of things. Like flying is safe.
Until you're
Um
like 15 years old and you're sitting by the emergency exit, and the flight stewardess asks if there's an emergency that happens on the airplane, am I comfortable with helping everyone get off the airplane? And I'm like, who the fuck wants to switch seats with me? Because I am not prepared.
well, that's why they ask you though, so that you can switch seats.
Nobody switches. Nobody's
What?
giving up their seat, especially if you got an aisle. If you got an aisle, you got it made.
I would like totally switch for the emergency exit seat every time for the extra leg room. Like every time.
Then what happens if the plane goes down?
I think that I'm actually pretty good under pressure, so
Have you ever
not worried about
seen snakes on a plane?
it. Yes, I've seen snakes on a plane.
Okay.
Snakes
Just
don't bug me. Spiders, like if it was spiders on a plane, I'd be like, I'm out. But snakes, like whatever.
spiders don't bug me. Snakes don't really freak me out. But what does freak me out is blowing up in midair. I rather take my own life at that point. I want to make sure I meet my maker the way I want to meet my maker.
Okay. I mean, but yeah. And also flight simulation games are, it depends on the version, but like that's how pilots get trained is in flight simulators. They sit in flight simulator um, before they're allowed to like go into the real plane, and they have an instructor with them. And then the first time you fly solo is like a really big deal. It's a pretty big milestone. So, I
I'm pretty
mean,
good at taking off. I was just never good at landing. I'd end up flying for way too long, where it's like we have infinite gas, and it's been like 6 hours on the computer just playing flight simulator, and then I'd just be like, all right, everybody, we're going down. And I just pull the lever all the way down and just end it, because I didn't know how to end the game legit, like actually hit the pause menu and hit exit. I would just be like, everyone has
gosh. I think that the most important thing from those games to learn, like that is like actually like valid, is learning how to monitor all of the things in front of you at the same time, right? Because you need to look at like your all of your gauges, like you need to pay attention to your fuel, your direction, your altitude, like all the engine lights. So that's what's like realistic about flight simulators, is that like you need to be able to process all the information in front of you. And then like the physical part of it you learn in the plane with an instructor that isn't going to let you crash into the ground.
I'm trying to think here, because I just realized every time I've ever been on an airplane, I was basically just having my faith in the machine holding it together, and also the pilot that was piloting it.
I mean, if you're flying commercial, like those pilots, before they can ever fly a commercial aircraft, they have to have like 1,500 hours of flight time before they
That's
can
what I'm
even fly.
saying.
Like,
Pressure, you just snap. What happens if he's having a bad anxiety day? He didn't take a poop to get all his anxiety out. So next thing you know, he just snaps. Like, my wife hates me, screw it. And just, I automatically assumed it's a guy pilot. If my husband hates me, bam. And then there you go. That works either way. If they're gay, if they're straight, it doesn't matter. I'm just saying, you're having your faith in one person.
well, there's two people, there's two pilots, there's always two.
The
And
one kills the other one.
yeah,
That's just what happens.
they also go through really intense mental health screenings, like
This is,
really intense mental health screenings. So
I
I know
guess,
none of this is making you feel better, but I promise you're in safe hands.
I'm too deep into the anxiety now.
I think that like maybe road trips are probably like a better vacation idea for you than flying somewhere.
I need like a Tums. My stomach's getting the anxiety rumbles. Well, Jessica, I appreciate you giving me your time and coming out onto the podcast. Is there anything you want to promote, such as your Instagram page, any nonprofits or any organizations that you're involved with?
Well, I have my Instagram page, which is Jessica the Archaeologist, and my website and YouTube channel are going up on the 15th of October, which is International Archaeology Day. And in terms of, nonprofits, just if you have the ability to give right now to a charity that you care about, do it, because nonprofits that are not based around like the immediate needs presented by COVID are really, really, really struggling. So if there's something that you care about, if it's like trash in the ocean or, archaeology or your local historic society or any of those places, especially museums, they're really, really struggling. And there is a good chance that a museum or place that you like to go and love is not going to make it through COVID. So support them if you can. They'll appreciate it, even if it's just a couple dollars. Like, they could really use your help.
It's amazing. I would like to donate, if everybody's listening and wants to donate to my charity also. It is for, and I swear to God, this is a real thing I saw an advertisement for. And if it's somebody fucking with me, good job, because you got me hooked and got me crying for 15 minutes. Blind puppies. That's a legit thing. Holy shit, I had no idea that there were blind. I mean, I get it, but I didn't know there was a whole organization helping these blind puppies. Like, that's gotta suck to be a dog that can't see.
I mean, my in-laws
Whoa.
have a blind dog. They love her.
I mean, if they're old and get cataracts, it's understandable. But I saw a dog with both of its eyes sewed shut. And I
Oh,
was like,
that's
how the hell did that
heartbreaking.
happen? Like, well, there was a chemical thing and she ended up getting it in her eyes and they had to take her eyes out. I was like, so she's got no fucking eyes in her head. And her name was Lassie. And I swear to you, it was sad, and also you had the slight chuckle. But it was like the nicest dog in the world. But it's weird. I always tell people, like, if you're gonna adopt or you ask somebody to get a dog, they never really want to adopt, because you say, I'll give you a choice. You can have this puppy, any puppy you want, but it's gonna have 3 legs. You were gonna think differently about the dog, and you're gonna feel a little bit different until you grow a bond with it. It's weird. It's gonna go into this whole route of technology I'm afraid of, where I get like genetically modifying something to, like, let's say you're gonna have a baby and they tell you your baby has autism and they can take that out. Fucking do it. That's amazing. But if you start going, I can genetically modify your baby, so he is going to be 8 feet tall. He's going to be this. He's going to be that. He's going to have this and that. I'm like, that's fuck. Just because my baby, you want, okay, I want a baby with blue eyes, so you're just going to make it so it has blue eyes and not my own eyes? Like, that scares me, because that's like too much power.
Well, I think that scientists do a pretty good job generally of controlling themselves and the technology that they develop. What you're talking about is called CRISPR, and it has a lot of ethical restraints on how it's used, who has access to it. So don't let those things give you too much anxiety. As far as three-legged and blind dogs go, pound puppies are the best, okay? Like, dogs you get from the shelter are the best. They're the sweetest. They're the easiest to train. They're so loving and so loyal. So definitely, I would pick a blind three-legged dog from the pound over like some bred dog any day of the week.
I enjoy adopting from the pound, but then they give me that fake backstory where I'm like, don't do this to me. Don't tell me the dog was found in an alley living off pizza crust or garlic knots from fucking Domino's. Don't give me that. I know it. That's not what happened. Ah, God, man, I don't think I've ever enjoyed my anxiety more than this. I'm telling you. Thank you for that. That really helps me out.
No problem. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you reaching out, and this has been really fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode Out of the Blank podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode.